On March 15, 1943, a shivering darkness clung to the North Atlantic, a vast, hungry void punctuated only by the roiling whitecaps and the distant, unseen hulks of Convoy HX-229. The air, thick with the spray of monstrous waves and the metallic tang of diesel, carried the low, anxious thrum of engines, a symphony of vulnerability. Yet aboard the lead destroyer, USS O'Bannon, Captain Edward Sterling, a man whose spine was as straight as a ship's mast, felt a quiet confidence, believing his fleet was prepared for any German wolf pack. Little did he know, the very systems designed to protect them were about to fail, plunging them into a desperate struggle for survival. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This narrative will unveil how one man's audacious disregard for convention, born from the crucible of despair, transformed an impossible communication breakdown into a daring rescue, forever altering the fate of an entire convoy. The night had begun with a deceptive calm, a tense quiet that belied the treacherous conditions. Convoy HX-229, a lifeline of 38 merchant ships laden with vital supplies, was escorted by a patchwork of destroyers, frigates and corvettes, steaming eastward from New York towards Liverpool. Among them, the USS O'Bannon, a battle-hardened destroyer, cut through the churning black water, its radar antennae ceaselessly sweeping the inky expanse. Below deck, in the stifling metallic confines of the radio room, signalman third class Samuel "Sam" Miller, a lanky 20-year-old from coastal Maine with an uncanny knack for electronics, meticulously checked the main communications console. Static crackled, a constant reminder of the ocean's untamed nature, but the primary long-range high-frequency HF transceiver, a robust Collins transmitter, showed green indicator lights, signaling operational readiness. Miller hummed a forgotten tune, his fingers dancing across the knobs and dials. He knew his equipment intimately, every resistor, every vacuum tube. He'd spent countless hours studying schematics, tinkering with salvaged parts, building crystal radios as a boy. This was more than a job, it was a calling. Captain Sterling on the O'Bannon's bridge watched the horizon, his gaze piercing the gloom. He trusted his crew, particularly Commander Thomas Vance, his executive officer, a steady presence who balanced Sterling's rigid adherence to protocol with a pragmatic flexibility. "Any chatter, Vance?" Sterling asked, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. Vance shook his head. "All quiet, sir. The weather's closing in, though. Visibility dropping fast." The sea was a beast, its waves growing in height, threatening to swallow the smaller corvettes. The merchant ships, many of them older, struggled to maintain formation, their dark shapes appearing and disappearing in the troughs of the waves. The standard procedure for such conditions was strict radio silence, relying on short-range visual signals and the convoy's practiced maneuvers. But even those methods were stretched thin by the tempest. The real threat, however, lurked beneath the waves, unseen, unheard, a pack of hungry wolves waiting for a sheep to stray. Miles away, submerged in the frigid depths, Captain Lieutenant Erich Schneider, commander of the German U-boat U-564, observed the chaos developing on the surface through his hydrophones. His crew, a seasoned band of hunters, worked with grim efficiency. "Hydrophone contact, bearing 2-70, faint engine noises, multiple screws," reported his soundman, Oberleutnant Karl Richter. Schneider, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his iron cross, smiled thinly in the dim red light of the control room. "The storm is our ally, Richter. It scatters them for us." He had been shadowing the convoy for days, waiting for the opportune moment, and this monstrous Atlantic gale was delivering it. The merchant ships, now struggling to hold their position, would soon become isolated targets, easy prey for his torpedoes. He envisioned the glory, the commendations, the recognition from Dönitz himself. This convoy would not make it to Liverpool. He issued crisp, confident orders, guiding U-564R into a prime attack position, perfectly positioned to exploit the impending disarray. The stage was set for a confrontation where the forces of chaos and human ingenuity would clash in the unforgiving heart of the ocean. The unsuspecting convoy was about to face its gravest challenge yet. The storm intensified with a savage ferocity that seemed to mock human endeavor. Within the hour, the O'Bannon was pitching violently, its bow plunging into green walls of water before heaving skyward, shuddering. Down in the radio room, the once stable hum of the Collins HF transceiver began to falter. Sam Miller frowned, tapping the casing. The primary long-range communication was essential for coordinating the escort ships and receiving vital intelligence updates from Shore Command. "Static's getting worse, Lieutenant," Miller reported to Lieutenant Commander Arthur Jenkins, the O'Bannon's communications officer. "Fluctuations in the carrier wave. I think we're losing signal integrity on the main array." Jenkins, a stoic man who usually greeted problems with a grim determination, felt a prickle of unease. "Keep at it, Miller. We need that link." But the sea had other plans. A monstrous wave, a liquid mountain, slammed into the O'Bannon's foredeck, sending a shockwave through the entire vessel. Down in the radio room, a shower of sparks erupted from the main HF transceiver, followed by the acrid smell of burnt insulation. The green indicator lights flickered, then died, plunging the console into an ominous darkness. "Circuit failure! Power surge!" Miller yelled, recoiling from the smoking panel. He scrambled to cut the power, but it was too late. The primary long-range radio system, their lifeline to the outside world and other escort groups, was dead. Jenkins stared at the damaged equipment, his face pale in the emergency lighting. "Of all the times," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Miller, any chance of a quick fix?" Miller, already assessing the damage, shook his head grimly. "Not at sea, sir. Not without a major overhaul. The transformers fried and several tubes are blown. We're blind and deaf on HF." On the bridge, Captain Sterling felt the shift in the ship's rhythm, the growing isolation. Commander Vance reported the communications failure with a strained voice. "Main HF comms are down, sir. Jenkins reports severe damage. We're relying on short-range VHF for intership communication, but even that's struggling in this weather, and it's prone to static and interference." Sterling slammed a fist silently on the chart table. "Damn it! And the merchant ships?" Vance consulted a log. "Visibility is nearly zero, sir. Reports of several ships struggling to hold formation, dropping astern. We've lost visual contact with at least 2. The convoy, once a tightly knit defensive unit, was now slowly fracturing, each merchant ship an isolated beacon of vulnerability. The very weather that provided cover also scattered them, making them easy pickings. Below the surface, Captain Lieutenant Schneider's hydrophone operator, Richter, reported a distinct change. "Fewer engine signatures, Captain Lieutenant. They are scattering, and something else. A high-pitched whine, almost like a sonar pulse, but irregular, very faint." Schneider pondered this new development. A malfunctioning ASDIC unit, perhaps, or a new British trick. He adjusted his plan, ordering U-564 Rain to move closer, cautiously. The unexpected sound added a layer of uncertainty, but the prospect of a scattered convoy was too tempting to resist. The stage was set for a dramatic escalation, as the crippled convoy, isolated and breaking apart, drifted unwittingly towards a waiting predator, while a single, determined sailor grappled with the ruins of their communication systems, knowing that conventional solutions were no longer an option. The storm howled, a grim conductor for the impending tragedy. The loss of primary communication plunged the O'Bannon and, by extension, the entire escort group into a terrifying void. The short-range VHF radios, designed for line-of-sight communication, were rendered nearly useless by the monstrous waves and dense, swirling mist that had descended with the storm. Static, crackling like 1,000 tiny electrical storms, swallowed voices, making coherent messages impossible. On the bridge, Captain Sterling paced, his brow furrowed with a mixture of frustration and mounting dread. "We're losing them, Vance," he murmured, staring into the impenetrable blackness. "The merchant ships are drifting apart. Soon they'll be scattered across miles of ocean, isolated targets." Commander Vance nodded grimly. "We've tried flashing lights, sir, but the visibility is too low. The flag hoists are out of the question in this gale. Every conventional method of communication, every standard operating procedure, was being systematically defeated by the elements." Sam Miller, down in the radio room, worked feverishly, trying to coax life from the auxiliary low-frequency LF transmitter. This unit, usually reserved for highly specialized, long-range and very slow Morse code transmissions, was never intended for rapid multi-ship coordination. It was old, prone to interference, and its range was far less than the main HF system. "It's barely holding a carrier wave, sir," he reported to Lieutenant Commander Jenkins, his voice strained over the ship's groans. "And even if I get a message out, it'll take ages to send, and the reception will be dreadful across the convoy." Jenkins ran a hand over his face. "We don't have ages, Miller. The U-boats will be closing in. They'll have heard the main HF system go quiet." The silence, once a strategic advantage, was now a loud alarm bell for the enemy. Indeed, below the surface, Kapitän-Leutnant Schneider was receiving precisely that confirmation. "No more HF chatter, Kapitän-Leutnant," Richter announced. "Their primary comms are down, and the scattered engine noises are growing fainter in places, more distinct in others. They are truly breaking formation." Schneider's smile broadened. "Perfect. The storm has done our work for us. Now, we just need to pick them off, one by one." He ordered U-564 to increase speed, navigating by the increasingly chaotic soundscape of the fracturing convoy. The strange, irregular VLF pulses Richter had reported earlier were still present, her curious anomaly, but Schneider dismissed them as a minor distraction, perhaps a damaged ship emitting interference. His focus was entirely on the vulnerable, uncoordinated targets above. Back on the O'Bannon, the reality of their predicament was sinking in with crushing weight. One of the merchant ships, the SS Queen Anne's Revenge, a tanker carrying precious aviation fuel, had just reported engine trouble via a desperate, garbled VHF burst before its signal vanished completely. It was now truly alone, adrift somewhere in the black expanse. "We need to reform them somehow," Captain Sterling stated, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Without communication, they're sitting ducks." Vance grimaced. "But how, sir? Even our signal lamps are useless in this fog." The standard playbook offered no solutions for this level of systemic failure, coupled with extreme weather. The convoy was dissolving, unit by unit, into the vast, hungry ocean, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. The only hope lay in a radical departure from everything they knew, a desperate gamble that no sane officer would ever consider. The psychological pressure was immense, pushing men to the brink, forcing them to contemplate the unthinkable as the darkness deepened and the enemy closed in. The O'Bannon's radio room felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with the smell of ozone and the unspoken fear of impending disaster. Sam Miller, watching the flickering needle on the auxiliary LF transmitter, suddenly slammed his fist on the console, a rare display of frustration. "It's useless. Too slow, too unreliable in this mess. We need something immediate, something that cuts through this static and fog, something they can feel." Lieutenant Commander Jenkins looked up, his eyes bloodshot from strain. "Feel, Miller? What are you suggesting, sonic signals? That's ASDIC, meant for submarines, not surface communication, and it'll alert every U-boat for miles." Miller's eyes, however, held a spark, an idea forming, wild and unconventional. "Not ASDIC, sir, but something like it. Something that uses sound or vibration transmitted through the water, not for speech, but for a specific rhythmic pulse." Captain Sterling, on a desperate tour of his ship to assess all options, arrived at the radio room. He overheard Miller's half-formed idea. "Explain, Miller," he demanded, his voice crisp. Miller, though intimidated by the captain's presence, felt the urgency pushing him forward. "Sir, we have the ANSQS-1 sonar system. It's meant for detecting submarines, true, but it emits powerful acoustic pulses. If we could modify it, even briefly, to send a unique, coded pattern, say a series of short, distinct clicks, that pattern would travel through the water. It's directional, yes, but the signal would be strong enough for the other escorts, and perhaps even some of the larger merchant ships equipped with basic hydrophones, to pick up. We could use it to signal reform formation bearing X degrees." Jenkins stared at Miller as if he had grown a second head. "Modify the sonar?" "Miller, that's insane. You'd risk damaging the entire system, and you'd be broadcasting our position to every U-boat in the sector." Miller stood his ground. "Sir, we're already broadcasting our position by existing. The U-boats are hearing our engines anyway, and the alternative is watching the convoy dissolve ship by ship. This isn't for speech, sir. It's for a rhythmic, coded pulse, a simple come-to-me signal, using a pre-arranged code pattern. We could use the existing convoy-wide recognition signal, just pulsed through the sonar." He glanced at Jenkins, then at Sterling, his voice gaining conviction. "It's our only chance to reform them now. If we don't, there won't be a convoy left to protect." Captain Sterling looked from the earnest, almost frantic signalman to the grim-faced communications officer. The idea was indeed preposterous, a fundamental violation of operational protocols, and dangerously risky. But the grim reality of their situation, the utter failure of all conventional methods, gnawed at him. He saw the logic in Miller's desperate last-ditch suggestion. "What's the risk to the sonar system, Miller?" Sterling asked, his voice betraying a hint of curiosity. "There's a chance of frying the transducer if we run it continuously, sir, especially out of its normal operating parameters," Miller admitted. "But for short, burst transmissions, I believe we can manage it. It's designed for power." Commander Vance, who had followed Sterling, spoke up. "Captain, the alternative is catastrophic. We're losing ships and we're blind. This might be a long shot, but it's a shot." Sterling weighed the options: adhere to protocol and watch the convoy perish, or gamble on an insane idea to save them. The lives of thousands of men and the fate of vital war supplies hung in the balance. The heavy silence in the radio room was broken only by the groaning of the ship and the relentless static from the dead radios. It was a moment of profound crisis, where the line between desperation and genius became indistinguishably thin. A decision unconventional and fraught with peril had to be made, and quickly. Captain Sterling's gaze settled on Sam Miller, a young man radiating a strange blend of fear and resolute conviction. The weight of command pressed down on Sterling, but he also recognized the desperation in Miller's eyes, a reflection of his own. "All right, Miller," Sterling stated, his voice firm, cutting through the tension. "Explain the exact procedure. How do we convert the sonar to a signal transmitter? And how will the other ships know what it means?" Miller, breathing a silent sigh of relief, launched into the technical details, speaking rapidly. "Sir, the ANSQS-1 has a powerful magnetostrictive transducer. We can feed a modulated pulse from the auxiliary radio unit directly into the transducer's driver circuit, bypassing the standard sonar processing unit. This will allow us to create a distinct rhythmic pattern. For the code, we use the standard reform on lead escort signal, but pulsed. 3 short pulses, a pause, 3 more shorts, a long pulse. They'll recognize the cadence." Lieutenant Commander Jenkins, still skeptical, interjected, "But how will they distinguish it from natural ocean noise, or even a U-boat's own pings?" Miller replied, "The amplitude, sir, and the frequency. I can tune it slightly off the standard sonar frequency used by the British and other escorts. It'll be a unique signature, and we'll broadcast a specific heading, due east, our convoy's main course. We'll use the ship's heading for the directional aspect, turning the O'Bannon in a slow circle while pulsing, creating a beacon effect that sweeps across the sector. The idea was audacious, risky, and a technical improvisation that bordered on heresy. It involved dismantling parts of one critical system and force-feeding it signals from another, all while in a raging storm." Sterling nodded slowly. "Very well. Vance, prepare the bridge. We'll maneuver the O'Bannon as Miller directs. Jenkins, ensure Miller has everything he needs. And Miller, I hold you personally responsible for the integrity of that sonar unit. If it fails, we're truly blind." The unspoken implication was clear. Failure meant catastrophe. Miller felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. He moved with practiced speed, stripping covers off the ANSQS-1 sonar console. Wires were disconnected, new leads spliced in. He worked with a delicate precision, his hands steady despite the ship's violent pitching. The air was thick with the smell of hot metal and sweat. His fingers, calloused from years of tinkering, expertly manipulated connections, bypassing safety interlocks and rerouting circuits. The sonar technicians, initially aghast, watched in stunned silence, then began to assist, handing Miller tools, understanding the desperate stakes. On the bridge, Captain Sterling issued orders to the helmsman and engine room. All ahead 1/3, helm 20 degrees to port. We'll begin a slow, sweeping turn. The O'Bannon began to yaw, its powerful engines pushing it through the mountainous waves. Commander Vance stood by the radio, monitoring the faint VHF chatter for any sign of other escorts receiving the signal or any enemy reaction. Below, Miller made the final connections. He adjusted a dial, listened intently through a set of headphones, and then gave a thumbs up. "Ready, sir," he called out to Jenkins, who relayed the message to the bridge. Sterling barked, "Begin transmission." A low, resonant thrum vibrated through the O'Bannon's hull, a strange rhythmic pulse that was felt more than heard. It was the converted sonar, now a desperate beacon, broadcasting its silent plea into the black abyss. Miller watched his improvised meters, praying the transducer wouldn't overheat, praying the signal would be strong enough, praying the other ships would understand. The fate of the entire convoy now rested on a makeshift radio connection, fed through a submarine hunting device, a desperate, insane hack born of a young sailor's ingenuity and a commander's willingness to gamble everything. The first few minutes felt like an eternity, an unbearable tension gripping the crew, waiting for a sign, any sign, that their gamble had paid off, or that it had sealed their doom. For what felt like an eternity, the O'Bannon continued its slow, sweeping arc, emitting the strange, rhythmic pulses into the tempestuous North Atlantic. The thrumming vibration of the sonar, now repurposed, resonated through the ship's hull, a constant reminder of the desperate gamble. Sam Miller watched his jerry-rigged console with eagle eyes, the sweat beading on his forehead as he monitored the power output and the temperature of the transducer. The risk of burnout was constant, but the alternative was annihilation. "Still transmitting, sir," he reported, his voice hoarse. "Power holding stable." On the bridge, Captain Sterling stood by the open door, allowing the icy spray to lash his face as if to sharpen his senses. The silence from the other ships, save for the incessant static on the emergency VHF, was deafening. Had the signal been lost in the storm? Had it been misunderstood? Or worse, had it merely served to pinpoint their position for the lurking U-boats? Commander Vance, his face etched with worry, reported, "Still no confirmation of reception from any escort, sir. The weather's making VHF impossible beyond a few hundred yards." Despair began to set in, a cold, creeping dread that matched the frigid ocean air. Below the surface, Captain Lieutenant Schneider of U-564 was indeed picking up the unusual VLF pulses, but his interpretation was far from accurate. "The strange signals are intensifying." "Captain Lieutenant," Richter reported, his headphones pressed tightly to his ears. "They are rhythmic now and quite strong, bearing shifting from 030 to 090. It's like a sweep." Schneider's cunning mind immediately sought a strategic explanation. A new British jamming technique, or perhaps a decoy operation trying to draw us away from the main convoy. He scoffed. "They underestimate us. They are attempting to mask their true positions, making us chase ghosts." He adjusted U-564's course, moving away from the sweeping signal, believing it to be a ruse, a misdirection designed to lure him into a trap, rather than the desperate rallying cry it truly was. His overconfidence, fueled by his earlier success and the apparent chaos among the convoy, became the unwitting ally of the beleaguered Americans. Then a flicker of hope, a faint, almost imperceptible blip on the O'Bannon's own short-range sonar receiver. "Contact! Bearing 045, very distant, sir," reported the sonar operator, his voice trembling with excitement. "A merchant ship, sir, it seems to be, adjusting course towards us." Then another and another. The slow, rhythmic thrumming of the O'Bannon's improvised beacon was beginning to work. Other ships, equipped with even basic hydrophones, were starting to pick up the unmistakable pattern. They recognized the prearranged cadence: 3 short bursts, a pause, 3 short, 1 long. The signal for reform on lead escort, now transmitted not by radio or lamp, but by the very vibrations of the ocean itself. Slowly, agonizingly, ships began to respond. On the bridge, Commander Vance, who had been listening intently to the faint VHF, suddenly pointed. "Captain, signal lamp on the port beam. Faint, but it's there. The USS Dryden. She's signaling acknowledgement." Sterling's heart leaped. The Dryden, another destroyer, was closer than he thought. If the destroyers could re-establish contact, they could guide the merchants. "Miller, keep it up. Hold that signal," Sterling roared, a genuine smile breaking through his grim facade for the first time in hours. The convoy, which had been dangerously fragmented, was slowly, miraculously beginning to coalesce. The O'Bannon's daring, insane signal hack, against all odds, was working. The gamble had paid off, pulling the convoy back from the brink of certain disaster, defying both the raging storm and the lurking enemy, buying precious time for survival. The desperate, throbbing signal was now a beacon of hope in the unforgiving night. The O'Bannon's makeshift sonar beacon continued its rhythmic thrum, a pulsating heart in the chaotic darkness. Slowly, painstakingly, the scattered ships of Convoy HX-229 began to respond. Merchant vessels, once isolated specks on a vast and terrifying ocean, began to alter course, their dim navigation lights appearing and disappearing through the fog, gravitating towards the rhythmic underwater pulse. The USS Dryden, having acknowledged the signal, began transmitting its own, fainter version using its auxiliary sonar, amplifying Miller's message and acting as a relay for ships further out. This impromptu network, born of desperation, knit the convoy back together. On the O'Bannon's bridge, Captain Sterling watched the faint outlines of ships emerge from the mist with a profound sense of relief. "They're reforming, Vance. Look at them." Commander Vance, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, nodded, a wide grin spreading across his face. "The Queen Anne's Revenge is back in sight, sir. She's limping, but she's holding her own, steering for our signal." The tanker, previously given up for lost, had heard the call and was rejoining the flock. Down in the radio room, Sam Miller finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, slumping against his console. The sonar transducer, pushed far beyond its intended limits, was glowing faintly, but it was still transmitting. He had done it. He had taken an insane idea and, through sheer technical ingenuity and courage, pulled it off. Lieutenant Commander Jenkins clapped him on the shoulder, a rare display of emotion. "Miller, you brilliant, crazy son of a gun, you saved us." Below the surface, Captain Lieutenant Schneider, still convinced the rhythmic pulses were a decoy, had moved U-564I further away from the emerging convoy. He had spent precious minutes chasing what he believed to be a diversion, allowing the real targets to escape his immediate grasp. "Hydrophone reports are confused, Captain Lieutenant," Richter reported, his voice laced with frustration. "The scattered engine noises are coalescing. They are forming up again, and the unusual VLF signals are now accompanied by standard short-range VHF chatter, weak but unmistakable. They have re-established communication somehow." Schneider slammed his fist against the periscope housing. "Verflucht! A trick! They regrouped." The U-boat commander, blinded by his own assumptions and disdain for unconventional tactics, had been outmaneuvered not by superior technology, but by audacious improvisation. By the time he realized his error, the convoy had regained much of its cohesion, its escorts now forming a tighter, more formidable screen. The moment for a decisive, scattered attack had passed. As dawn slowly broke, painting the eastern sky with bruised purples and greys, the storm began to abate, revealing a convoy, battered but intact. Though still exposed to potential U-boat attacks, the ships were no longer isolated and adrift. The escorts formed a protective ring, their guns manned, their sonar systems now fully operational again, as Miller carefully returned the rigged transducer to its normal state, sweeping the waters. The crisis had passed, the immediate threat averted. The sight of the unified convoy, steaming purposefully eastward, was a testament to the power of human ingenuity under unimaginable pressure. Without the primary communications, without visual contact, and with an enemy waiting, one sailor's insane idea, a radical repurposing of technology, had turned certain defeat into a fighting chance. The morning light revealed a convoy reborn, salvaged from the clutches of the storm and the Silent Hunters of the Deep, a story of ingenuity against overwhelming odds. In the immediate aftermath, Sam Miller, though exhausted, felt a quiet satisfaction. Captain Sterling, a man rarely given to effusive praise, called Miller to the bridge. "Signalman Miller," Sterling began, his voice devoid of its usual stiffness, "your actions last night were unconventional, highly irregular, but they were also brilliant. You demonstrated initiative and technical prowess beyond expectation. The convoy, and indeed this ship, owes you a great debt." Miller simply nodded, a faint blush on his cheeks. For his daring act he received a quiet commendation, a notation in his service record that hinted at ingenuity without fully detailing the insane lengths he went to. The specifics of the improvised sonar hack were largely kept off the official records, deemed too sensitive or too much of a breach of protocol to be openly documented. It became a legend whispered among the crew, a testament to one man's courage and unconventional thinking. The convoy, though still facing the perils of the Atlantic crossing, had bought itself invaluable time. The regrouping allowed them to withstand subsequent, albeit less effective, U-boat attacks over the next few days, eventually reaching Liverpool with minimal further losses. The incident highlighted a critical vulnerability in naval communications during extreme weather and showcased how, in the crucible of war, desperation could be the mother of profound innovation. It forced commanders to reconsider the rigidity of standard protocols and to recognize the potential for individual initiative to transform seemingly hopeless situations. The episode served as a stark reminder that even the most advanced military technologies could be rendered useless by simple forces of nature, but that human ingenuity, adaptable and unyielding, could often find a way through. After the war, Samuel Miller, having survived the conflict, returned to Maine. He never sought fame for his wartime heroics, preferring the quiet life of an electronics tinkerer and inventor. He opened a small radio repair shop, his hands, once accustomed to manipulating critical circuits under pressure, now calmly fixing household appliances. His mind, however, never stopped inventing. He held several patents for improvements in radio reception and acoustic signaling, quiet contributions to civilian technology. Captain Edward Sterling, deeply impacted by the incident, became a strong advocate for more adaptable communication systems and the empowerment of junior officers and enlisted personnel to propose innovative solutions. He retired a respected admiral, often recounting "the night we almost lost the convoy" as a lesson in humility and the power of unexpected heroism. Captain Lieutenant Erich Schneider, though he survived the war, carried the sting of his misjudgment regarding Convoy HX-229, a stark lesson that overconfidence and rigid adherence to assumptions could lead to missed opportunities, even for a seasoned U-boat ace. The story of Convoy HX-229 and signalman Sam Miller is a powerful illustration of the individual's capacity to alter the course of history in moments of profound crisis. It underscores the theme that innovation often blossoms from desperation, that the greatest solutions can sometimes emerge from the most unconventional minds, and that true leadership means trusting the insane idea when all else has failed. In the vast, impersonal machinery of war, it was a moment of singular brilliance, a testament to the fact that even against overwhelming odds, a single, daring act could defy catastrophe and save countless lives. The fragile threads of communication, broken by storm and enemy, were rewoven by a sailor's audacious hack, an act of sheer will that carved a beacon of hope from the deep, dark heart of the Atlantic. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.